What is up, y'all? It's your boy Yankee coming at you with another review for My Hero Academia Chapter 342. If you haven't read it, you already know you gotta go. Standard page by page breakdown, opening with UA High. First off, I'd like to say that I love the fact that the evacuee residential area is clearly something that they worked on, put a lot of thought into. It's basically set up like a small town. If you think back to UA Heights, when we first got the dorms, they did kind of pop up seemingly rather quickly. And then considering it later on in the chapter when we see that they got the remote base and it's established that was built by Power Loader, Ectoplasm, and Cementos, we can see now that like more than likely they built these essentially apartment complexes rather quickly within the span of a couple weeks, days. So while people have been stuck, of course, in an evacuation shelter due to the size of the UA campus, they aren't necessarily living horribly on location, at least. So at least they're not just, living in a tent city and waiting out their death. So we get the confirmation that many of us have thought of, which is multiple traders, multiple plants. It wouldn't make sense for All for One to start this arc off, which this particular stretch of the story, keep in mind, started with the reveal of the UA trader and an emphasis on All for One having an abundance of allies and an emphasis on the idea that All for One has multiple plans, contingencies for getting what he wishes to achieve. And so we get to reveal one of them through this, which is essentially that he wanted them to create a hostile environment for Midoriya, one where people would be against him. Obviously, I think that to a certain degree they've consistently factored in that there might be a traitor in the midst of UA. That's why they tried to do their best to keep it quiet about Ayama, not only for the sake of maintaining peace, but also for focusing on not giving information to traders about what information they have acquired. Now, as far as just constantly making people hate Deku, that's just a given. That's kind of what the strategy has been throughout the series. The whole premise of this conflict built up and built off of the idea of removing society's trust in heroes and allowing for it to topple this way and create, such a chaotic environment and social climate. So just doing more of what we've been doing throughout the story. And when we finally have a cutaway to the 1A kids, we get the idea that they've just still been searching, doing what they can to find out, where the villains are, what they are up to, trying their best to be proactive. New costume modification reveal for Ida is that his helmet is now modified so that his face can be seen. My favorite part about this modification is specifically that it allows people to connect with you better when they can see your actual face. A mask hides who you are, and it hides your humanity. It hides your ability to connect with people. And you're supposed to be saving more than just people's bodies, doing more than just beating people up, doing all that other stuff. So moving them from A to B. So this is just another way that Ida's improved his ability to connect with others. So that's just a cool thing to think about. And then we also have the whole Mineta just kind of rambling. Mineta's conversation is just kind of an empty joke designed to just have something for Deku to be ignoring while thinking about how he wants to talk to Ochako, without Deku being in the position where he's ignoring important information. So we put a joke here so that Deku ignoring this conversation doesn't hurt his actual dynamics that matter or hurt the plot in any meaningful way. So, and we get the assurance that they've been busy, they've been in crowded areas. He's like, I haven't been able to thank her properly. And specifically, you can see that when he's talking about it, he's like looking at her while she's got Mina already right next to her, seemingly potentially in mid-conversation. So Deku minding his manners, trying to make sure that if he's going to talk to her about that stuff, it's in private. It doesn't need to be a public conversation. It's worth noting that in this particular instance, both of them have been rather private about how they feel about each other, so they didn't need to have that public discourse. It's not like Uraka has ever sat around talking about how she feels openly on purpose or willfully. In fact, every time Mina's gone down that road or that rabbit hole, Uraka has made it a point to reject having those kinds of conversations. So it wouldn't have made sense for Deku, as even a decent friend, even ignoring any of the romance and stuff, to try to push those conversations in public. Just not what she's about. And that's why you didn't get that right away in chapter 327. All Might's there. He's with Sukauchi. We have Nezu on Sukauchi's shoulders. I thought that's an interesting touch, because typically I don't expect Nezu to be on people's shoulders who we have no reason to believe they have gone to UA. Sukauchi, as far as I know, is just someone who is a cop that All Might met in the field. So we'll see with that. Of course, we've talked about on this channel Nezu being a traitor potentially, as a sleeper agent that's activated. We talked about how Sukauchi could be a traitor if his sister's been taken by All For One. After all, they did mention how All For One can tell if you're lying. Sukauchi's sister had the ability where if she were in contact with you, she could stop you from being able to lie to her. So in theory, if he combined something like Rivet Stab with the polygraph quirk, then he would have a consistent hold on you and you would not be able to lie to him. Stuff like that. When we finally get to the meeting about what comes next, one of the things that's worth noting is that we're consistently being kept out of the loop on what the plan is. We're not getting the very specifics, the nitty gritty. It's worth noting, though, that I will say that Ragdoll coming back seems to indicate that they are being very specific in who they pluck into their forces, who they believe. So if we do get a traitor, it likely won't be anybody who is brought out of the new recruits that we're seeing a lot more. So somebody like Ragdoll, whose quirk was taken by All For One, we're probably not going to see her being against them. So if we do see, some traitor, it's going to be somebody who has already been here, effectively waiting for them. And especially when, as we reveal that the students are leaving and people are excited and they say their goodbyes, Shoji talking to Ippon Jose, or the regular girl, obviously foreshadowing more of the discrimination discussion and heteromorphic issues to come into play in the arc. Deku getting a proper goodbye with his mom, saying goodbye to the kids. Death Arms is staying at UA, gone from being a hero in the beginning, protecting these kids, to, especially in the case of Deku and Bakugo, quite literally trying to be the one saving them, to being someone who's being protected by them in the span of 2 years. Royal life comes at you fast. But at the makeshift fortress of Troy, it's worth noting, so we got to talk about the fall of Troy, right, where there's a Trojan horse, where it's supposed to be a gift that somebody brings into them, and in turn ends up not being an actual gift. So I guess you could argue that if they find any technology, if they find, basically, we don't want them bringing anything new to Troy. That's how I look at this, because if they bring anything to Troy, it is automatically going to be an issue. The fall of Troy is one of the most commonly known stories in the world. Part of me feels like you could have, when Sukauchi came into the room earlier when they were at UA and had Nezu on his shoulder, that he was operating as the Trojan horse, an ally or a gift coming into their presence, but bringing in the seed of their destruction. In this case, it would have been Nezu, who would have overseen the specs and the building of the impromptu fort, of course. And then we get to what I think a lot of people have been waiting for, what everybody's been excited about. Deku finally talking to Uraka. Now, the small talk portion, them talking about whether or not they're packed and all those other things, on one hand, it's reflective of them being kind of similar, like-minded in their approach to how they're going to go about this. They're expecting to go on this hero mission. You could argue that both of them have seen the dangers of this, especially because they've been so close to these instances of violence and calamities, that maybe they're also considering, like, more than likely if we fail, we don't live past this. Obviously, that's taking a pretty dark creepypasta level take on that scene, but, that's how it is. But one thing that I do want to highlight here is that when you look at that panel, Deku has effectively his hero uniform on the outside, like his hero gear on the outside, and his UA uniform on his lower layer, and then Uraka has the hero uniform on, but she's got a regular person's shirt or her regular button down over her hero uniform. And I think this is kind of it could easily be representative of what they prioritize, but I think more specifically what they see first when they look at a person. Because when Deku looks at himself, or I guess we could say what they see when they look at each other, perhaps. Because when Deku looks at himself, what Deku focuses on is the hero, how amazing XYZ, but Uraka has been focused on who heroes are as people. Yes, they have these costumes on, but ultimately heroes are humans with their own limits, and she's been talking about this and thinking about this for hundreds of chapters, and technically most of her life, since she's been worried about it ever since the Eel Boy incident and this idea of heroes having safety. So Uraka sees the people, even when she looks at a hero or dresses like a hero, she's a person before anything else. And I think that with Deku, he's a hero before he is a person in his mind. With him valuing his quirk and valuing what One for All needs to, and emphasizing his self-worth and attaching that to that aspect so heavily, that shows how they differ. And yet it's worth noting that they both still upgrade, and when they modify their costumes, they often mirror each other. And so it's kind of like a different take on the opposites attract, where both of them head to this point where they still reach the same conclusion of being a hero and being the best hero they can be and helping people along the way. They just end up helping different people within the same spheres, and that's something to take into consideration. And like I said, the whole Deku directly apologizing for not being able to find a moment does kind of corroborate the notion that he understood that this is a private conversation that you don't have in public, and you don't, if you're going to potentially even halfway maybe slide into a conversation about your romantic feelings for someone, you don't do it in public. Thank you, Horikoshi, for understanding how that works. Now, what I like about this is that this scene also gave us a reason for them to further talk and interact and have another, further establishing of a bond. Specifically because during this scenario where we have Uraka more than likely talking to Deku, and only Deku, about how she's been pondering Himiko Toga and what Toga said to her, and how what Toga and her reaction made her think about what she's fighting for, even with also factoring in all the things that she's been having to focus on, with watching a hero quit in front of her, losing lots of allies, even seeing somebody like Death Arms go from in the streets to their shelters, watching the world fall apart and wondering where her friend went, and then having to go out and try to find him, of course, back with back in the Deku Far From Home section of the story. So we're seeing Uraka get to kind of ponder all these things, and basically having to weigh her sympathies for Toga as a person against the overall macro needs of society. And it's kind of fascinating to see that this issue has been one of the driving narratives, is that these people have constantly been thrown away, and to a certain degree they need to be validated, taken in, supported, and nurtured. But at this juncture, is it too far, is it too late in their lives to be able to safely reintegrate them back into society, or is it too far gone? And for Uraka, she kind of, when she says she's looking at the horizon to make sure she keeps in mind all the stuff that's happened, she's kind of making sure she keeps a full scale of who these people are, and doesn't lose that intimacy, that ability to see people first before their status as a hero, because that also consequently translates to being able to see them as a person before seeing them as a villain. Then she kind of has to, and we as readers kind of have to sit there and chew on this now, but also make sure that when she's in the fight, even if she wants to lend sympathy, she doesn't lend that sympathy before the villain is captured. So she can be sympathetic to Toga, and that could mean not killing Toga, but that should not mean letting Toga run away into the streets and potentially take more lives and harm more people. Making sure that she keeps it balanced. And Deku, having felt the same way, is still capable of seeing the people of others, but in Deku's case, Deku doesn't see his personhood that well. So in turn, Deku learning how to valuing everybody else hopefully will spur him to, especially if after he's injured, to look inside of himself and maybe start to extend that same sympathy that he's extending towards Shigaraki towards himself. And understanding that same feeling and that valuing that he places on others beyond just their quirks is the same valuing that he gets placed upon him by somebody like Uraka. But them both coming to each other and being able to understand that decision means that if we have a moment where there's a group conflict and we have a bunch of them and the heroes are maybe arguing about whether they want to kill somebody or let them live, if Deku's arguing to let them live, Uraka will likely be by his side. And so we'll have that dichotomy established where these two at least will be in this together, trying to figure out a way to, yes, see the humanity in these people while simultaneously making sure that other people aren't endangered and keeping a full-scale picture of what is at stake. Now, Ida and Shoto. Now, specifically, I want to highlight that the people in this room are the boys of Kamino, Ida, Shoto, Bakugo, and Kirishima. And I don't know why not Sue, but Momo isn't in this scene, but probably just because she doesn't spend as much time with the boys, or this is like the boy section. Which, if there's the fact that they're still following the school gender separation rules is kind of hilarious, but like also kind of sweet and wholesome. So they're sitting there talking about what they like, what they eat together, and Shoto admits that he doesn't know Toya. He doesn't know his brother, and that food thing ties back into when we met Natsuo, and he mentioned how he didn't know that Shoto liked soba. And for them, they're saying we don't know some of the most basic things to know about somebody. And the kind of the point of dishes like soba, like udon, and like these noodle soups is that they are moderately accessible dishes within the scope of like the area of Japan. So the idea of them not knowing that, it's kind of the same as not knowing somebody's favorite food is spaghetti, because spaghetti is so accessible. At some point it'd be like, oh wow, you eat lots of spaghetti. Well, of course that also depends on where you are, so switch that out for hamburgers, or switch it out for pizza, or switch it out for wings. But the point is that it's a simple thing that it just makes sense to know about someone, especially in this particular case. So when Bakugo jokes with him about it being hot udon, and he says, I'll have a bowl with him, it kind of shows that he'd still want to have that connection with Toya, even if they are total opposites, because it's important to note that Shoto's favorite dish is cold soba. So Shoto being a cold soba guy and still being wanting to eat that hot udon kind of just shows that I think deep down multiple of these characters, and when I mentioned Uraka being on Deku's side, I could see Shoto being there too, because that's his brother, even if I don't think Dabi should / can reasonably survive through the end of the story. It just seems like with the way his quirk impacts him and the way he lives and thinks, that he just kind of has to go splatter. But yeah, and then so that gives us a divide, especially if Momo's there, where we have Shoto and Momo, who have been close, kind of against each other, or arguing, and then we have Deku and Uraka with Bakugo and Kirishima on the other side, having been through all this stuff together, and Ida as well, or we got Sue, and so we got a lot of room for, and then maybe Sue even like taking that stand too with them. We have some room here with these characters being brought back to the forefront to see where they're going to be going and what their mindsets are. I really want to know if this is going to be a specific crew. Like, for example, if we have Deku versus Shigaraki, is this going to be the all-for-one attack squad? Could that be the case? Because we had some of Heroes Rising be derived from what the end of the manga was originally going to be. So we could have these split teams be, and Shoto, Kirishima, and Ida were a team against Chimera. So we could be getting the same team up where they're going to be taking on like All for One or Dabi maybe going from Dobby to All for One, etc. And so that's how we're going to get them and this team being on one mission. So yeah, just some things that we're thinking about. And All for One saying shall we likely just means that he's got some big message that he's going to be able to air across the nation, especially with the help of Skeptic. I wouldn't be surprised if some kind of death game gets started and like the very last bit of this final stretch is a massive death game across Japan that leads to people infighting at shelters, infighting across the town, and then like Shigaraki just going about and recollecting quirks and doing things like that to maintain and increase his power, just so that we can get this time for them to rally and then come together and actually go to war. Let me know what you guys think the end of the chapter and this overall chapter this week did for you and how you feel about it. I enjoyed it. Hope to see you guys Sunday for the Church of MHA. There's not really more I could say. Like, subscribe, give me your thoughts down below. Maybe become a member if you feel like it. I'm Aniki, and I am out.